The Chicago Bears have a lot of needs, but they also have a lot of salary cap space to fill them. But that doesn't mean that spending big money is going to be the best way to fill every position.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook, join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk, and make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On the show today, we'll look at specifically how and where the Chicago Bears should spend their money in free agency, and why it's not always the best plan to just throw all your money at your biggest needs. Not every need on this Bears roster, and not all the main ones, can just be solved by throwing free agent dollars at the problem. So we'll look at maybe where money isn't best spent at this stage of the offseason, where they might spend more money than you think, and where they really should be willing to open up the checkbooks here and throw some big cash at some big name or at least big impact free agent players. For me, the money has to go in the trenches because of both the importance to the Bears team and the size of the needs on the roster, but also what we're seeing in free agency this year compared to other positions and what's available and other needs on the Bears roster. Like, for example, to me, it's not about saying, okay, the Bears' biggest three needs should be the Bears' biggest three expenditures here. I do think pass rush and really across the defensive line should be pretty much at the top of the list. If I had to pick one position to truly spend the most at this offseason, to me, it's going to be that group. It's the edge rushers and the interior defensive linemen. We know that it's not a super top-end heavy class, certainly on the edge. There's some young guys to like on the interior. But as a result, I think you're going to see some lesser guys get more money than you might think they would based on the name recognition. Like, we keep talking about Dre'Mont Jones from the Denver Broncos, their defensive lineman. He's a guy who's never been certainly a 10-sack guy, and across his career, he's had seasons of 3.5, 6.5, 5.5, 6.5 sacks. That's pretty solid, but like those numbers don't jump out at you as going to be like $10+ million a year type contract, and that's sort of the range we're looking at with somebody like this, a young ascending interior defensive lineman. I have some questions as to whether he will be worth that much and how much more there is to his ceiling as a player. But at some point, the market kind of dictates some of that stuff, and that's where the type of position you might see the Bears spend more of their money. Zach Allen from the Arizona Cardinals, and of course, at the top, Javon Hargrave from the Philadelphia Eagles is going to command quite a hefty contract as the top interior pass rusher in this class, and Dalvin Tomlinson as the top nose tackle, really, in this class. And you look at the edge, you got guys like Yannick Ngakoue and Marcus Davenport that are probably going to get some pretty big deals there. Jadeveon Clowney, perhaps, as well. Like, there's some talent here, but it's not like sure thing guys across the board that are going to just be go-to 10-sack Pro Bowl caliber players every year. It's a little bit of some question marks there, but I think because of where the market sits in terms of the talent there, the Bears just need multiple players at those positions and are probably going to have to pay up fairly significantly and perhaps more than you think, right? We think back to Larry Ogunjobi last year. Felt like $13.5 million a year for Larry Ogunjobi seemed like a lot of money. We were kind of looking around saying, holy moly, the Bears seemed to kind of overspend on him. He'd had a 7-sack season was the best year he was coming off of, but man, $13.5 million. Fortunately in that case, the Bears were able to avoid it, unfortunately for Larry and his foot. But like, that's the kind of thing I'm expecting this year, again, with the Bears and a defensive lineman who's probably going to get more money than you might expect and ultimately shift more of the Bears spending that way. Give me an edge rusher and give me an interior defensive tackle in free agency. And that's going to be, I think, perhaps the biggest individual chunk at one position that the Bears may go out and spend. I also think the offensive line needs to be a high priority here. I think you have to go out and get a surefire starting caliber right tackle, someone who will lock down that spot, not someone who's going to compete with Alex Leatherwood and Larry Borum at right tackle, but someone who yes, you're handing him the starting job. You're saying he is our week one starter. There's a handful of guys in free agency this year that can handle that role. I mean, you could consider signing a left tackle and moving Braxton Jones as well, but go get me a surefire starting right tackle that is not going to be a question mark at any point in the season. And you're going to have to pay up for that. And that's okay. I think it's worth investing, maybe not in Orlando Brown top of the market money, but still very good and otherwise kind of expensive money in a good right tackle. Maybe you see them go after a center as well. That one seems a little bit more up in the air, if you ask me, just given how much they raved about Lucas Patrick last offseason when they signed him, and we really didn't get to see him play much at all, and very, very little center specifically. So, and I think I could easily see them saying, yeah, we're going to roll with Lucas Patrick again as our starting center, Sam Mustipher as our backup, and hope that they don't have to play as much Mustipher this year as they did last year. If I'm Ryan Poles, I'd like to aim higher and say, well, if I can get even better center than Lucas Patrick, go out and sign them. Make Lucas Patrick the backup center who can also be a spot starter at guard if you have injuries at any of those interior spots. We've seen Lucas Patrick be a very good backup for the Green Bay Packers, and that would feel like the ideal way to do it with the Chicago Bears. And so all of a sudden, if you sign a right tackle and a center, offensive line becomes one of your more expensive positions that you invest in here, in addition to defensive line and some of the pass rush availability that should be there for the Bears, even if it's not all guys that you're going to love or fall in love with or feel like the Bears are really getting, every penny that they invest in those players. There is a free agency premium that is going to be part of this equation across every position until you get to the really low value, good energy kind of swing for the fences type guys at the bottom of the free agent class. I think there are a couple positions though that are not going to be the biggest, the most expensive positions for the Bears that they're going to spend a bunch of money on. But I think there are a couple that they might spend more money on than you might think, just because it doesn't seem like positions that I'm seeing very many people talk that much about this offseason. So we'll find kind of the sneaky investments for the Bears in free agency next week, next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is powered by our friends at Built Bar, the world's best tasting protein bars, because Built Bars don't taste like other protein bars. Built Bars taste like candy bars. They're soft, they're easy to chew, they're covered in 100% real chocolate, but they're also good for you. It's the ultimate combination. It feels to me like a food hack in my life that I eat literally every single day. It's low sugar, low calories, high fiber, and high protein. We're talking 17 grams of protein and only 4 grams of sugar, only 130 calories. It sounds like too good to be true, but when you taste them, trust me, you'll become a believer. You can get them anytime at built.com, but now you can get them even faster at your local Walmart or Sam's Club. That's right, at Walmart, if you head over near the pharmacy section, you can grab yourself a box of Built Bars. They've got 4-bar boxes of cookies and cream, double chocolate, or their coconut puffs. I've had all three, all really good flavors. Or if you're near a Sam's Club, you can run in and grab a 13-bar box that has 2 of their hit flavors, really 2 of my all-time favorites, brownie batter and churro. Go check them out. I promise you will thank me later. A lot of the focus should be on the defensive line and offensive lines for the Chicago Bears in free agency. I know a lot of Bears fans are going to want money at wide receiver and want upgrades at wide receiver. I'm not sure that's going to be the case, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But I think there are a couple of positions that stand out to me as either the Bears will invest more money here than you think, or they should invest more money here than you might think on the front end. I think one is more likely than the other. I think the Bears are more likely to spend, I think, a decent amount of money at linebacker. They're not going to hand out a Roquan Smith $20 million a year contract at linebacker. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't have traded Roquan Smith. I think the Bears have shown generally that they don't value that position as the most important position in the defense. But that's not to say that they don't value it at all and don't feel like they need good players there, if not, and also like maybe even better players there than what we saw this team field last year. That Nick Morrow was okay. He's good-ish, but had some struggles there. Roquan Smith is gone, so not even part of the equation. Jack Sanborn played really, really well for 6 games, and those were some great 6 games. But do you rely on those 6 games of Jack Sanborn being the same Sanborn you're going to get every game for the rest of his career? I like Jack Sanborn, and they should develop Jack Sanborn and keep giving Jack Sanborn opportunities. But Jack Sanborn is not going to stop me from upgrading linebacker if I can. If I can't, I'll roll with Jack Sanborn. But I look at a guy like Tremaine Edmonds from the Buffalo Bills in the same draft class as Roquan Smith, a player who struggled a bit early in his career, but really, as he's gotten more experience, it seems to, like, the game seems to be slowing down for him a little bit and just seems to be a little bit more under control. But he's still, like, super fast and a heck of a lot bigger than Roquan Smith. And not to say that he's better than Roquan Smith by any means. No, there's a reason Tremaine Edmonds is hitting free agency, and Roquan Smith got a massive contract from the Baltimore Ravens. But if you want, like, I don't want to say a poor man's Tremaine Edmonds, because he'll get some money, but or a poor man's Roquan Smith, but like, if the Bears want some size and speed at that position and someone who's still young and ascending, like Tremaine Edmonds seems like it would be a great opportunity to come to Chicago and be that physical, athletic freak in the middle of this Bears defense. It's probably going to cost you $10, $11, $12 million a year. And that's a lot. It's a lot at linebacker to spend, and probably more at linebacker than we might think the Bears are going to spend there, especially because it wouldn't surprise me if they go out and grab maybe a couple of linebackers. Maybe not all at exactly the Tremaine Edmonds, double-digit millions of dollars price tag there, but, could you pair a Bobby Okereke with a Tremaine Edmonds, from the Indianapolis Colts, and knowing that you're going to have to pay Bobby, $3, $4, $5-ish million, depending on what that market looks like, plus 10, 11, 12-ish for Tremaine Edmonds, or whatever that looks like too. So it starts to add up here if you grab a couple of different linebackers to really improve that position, to add to what you already have in Jack Sanborn. I just think when you look at how big of a hole there is right now for the Bears, Sanborn's the only starting caliber player under contract right now. And even he, again, this is not a criticize Sanborn conversation at all, but like maybe he should be your number 3 linebacker, and you could do 2 better linebackers with Jack Sanborn. That's kind of where it feels like, ideally, if you have the cap space and there are players that you could go get that are reasonable, that would be the ideal plan. And so I could see them signing a couple of linebackers and maybe spending a decent amount of money on at least one. I also think they should put a priority at the tight end position in free agency. Again, this is not a Cole Kmet criticism point, but it's a add more at tight end. Why not add more? The Bears have already, or Cole Kmet just kind of recently said, yeah, we're talking about a contract negotiations right now. Probably not going to happen until the summer, but the conversations are ongoing. So the Bears are clearly already like, hey, Cole, we want you here, and we're going to work through that process. It's not going to be an offense to him if they go out and sign a better number 2 tight end than Trevon Wesco and Ryan Griffin and James O'Shaughnessy, who the Bears were rotating in there last year. We saw offensive coordinator Luke Getsy really wanted to use multiple tight ends a lot. They tried to go to a lot of 2 tight end sets, and Ryan Griffin and company just weren't really getting the job done. They were really average to below average. And that's not to say you have to go out and get another, like Mike Gesicki, for example. It's kind of near the top of some people's list from the Miami Dolphins. He's a great receiver, right? I mean, he's a guy who can move pretty well for a 6'6", 250-pound guy. Good hands, can catch the ball well, and can be an important part of your passing offense. And I would really like to see Mike Gesicki as that number 2 tight end to pair with Cole Kmet. The wide receiver free agent class is not very good. So go get a tight end who is a good receiver and add pass catchers that way, even if they're not wide receivers. And I would be interested in Mike Gesicki. But even if it's not someone of his caliber, if it's Hayden Hurst from the Cincinnati Bengals, if it's Austin Hooper, even an Irv Smith Jr., or Big Bob Tonyan from the Green Bay Packers, who was with Luke Getsy in Green Bay. One of these guys that you feel like can give you a little something that isn't just like Ryan Griffin and Trevon Wesco, and I'm sure they're good people, but they all kind of seem like generic creative players on Madden. You could kind of cycle them out with any of 50 different backup tight ends that are across the NFL that just don't really, they're okay blockers. They can catch it when you throw it to them, but they're not going to really get themselves very open. Like, there's 1,000 Ryan Griffin and Trevon Wescos in the NFL. That's exaggeration, but let's go get somebody in free agency then that can be more than that. Doesn't need to be a Pro Bowler to pair with Cole Kmet. I mean, I would have liked Evan Ingram had he become available, but go out and get Gesicki. Go out and get Dalton Schultz. I mean, within reason, within money, but it feels like, if you go out and get a better backup tight end, that's also going to cost you a little bit of something. Again, it doesn't have to be the top of the market tight end contract, but it's a position at the backup tight end that the Bears have over the last few years spent, $1 million or $2 million a year on in terms of the salaries for Ryan Griffin and others. But, Gesicki could be an $8-9 million plus tight end, Austin Hooper in the maybe 6-7 range below that, and Robert Tonyan in the 5-6 range below that. I mean, just throwing out numbers here, but it's more than the Bears are spending on Cole Kmet right now, and more than they've spent on the tight end position last year in total. But I think it could be a good upgrade for your offense and a position we don't hear a lot about that I think the Bears, at the very least, should go out and sign, and maybe we could expect them to add more there in lieu of spending big money at wide receiver, because that's one of the positions here that we can all agree is a need, and perhaps a fairly significant need in this roster, but it doesn't feel like a position that the Bears should try and spend a lot of money on in this free agent class, and I'm not sure that they will spend a lot of money on, perhaps not as much as people might think. So we'll kind of look at where things stand at wide receiver, and also a couple other positions that probably not going to see the Bears spend that much money on, even if you might like to see a luxury signing to bolster even more talent elsewhere on this roster. Next on Locked On Bears. Real quick, I want to thank everybody who tuned in yesterday, Thursday, March 9th, for our live stream Bears talk we had over on the Bleacher Report app. It was a lot of fun going live, communicating with the chat on there, and being a part of that conversation. Appreciate everyone who tuned in. If you missed it, we're going to be doing another live stream in the BR app on Monday at noon Central Time. So the free agent negotiation period opens at 11 a.m. Central Time. We're going to be live in the Bleacher Report BR app at noon Central Time on Monday, March 13th. So come join in that conversation, because it's a lot of fun. It's kind of like a live Q&A, but with a little bit more like direction than that. We'll be talking about the free agent signings and answering questions and going through all that stuff. So come on over. You can find the link if you need it on my Twitter feed at CoxSports1 when we get a little bit closer to Monday. When we get to Monday, we'll start finding out where the Bears are spending money on some of these free agent options. And it just doesn't feel to me like wide receiver is at least not going to be the best use of the Bears investing a lot of money there, and why I have to wonder if they really will. We talk about on this podcast, where should the Bears invest in free agency? I don't think they should invest a lot at wide receiver in this free agent class, and I kind of either hope or don't think they will then as a result, because as much as, we all want to see the Bears have better wide receivers for Justin Fields, I'm just not sure that investing big money in these free agent wide receivers are really going to be the best way to go about that. When you start to see numbers put out there for like Juju Smith-Schuster up in the, 14, 15, $16 million a year range. I mean, the type of range that just a couple of years ago the Bears were looking at for Allen Robinson, or when you look at Jacoby Myers from the New England Patriots, up and again in that like 12, 13, 14, $15 million a year range. I mean, boy, that feels like a lot for guys that are just not going to be number one wide receivers. I'm not sure that either of those guys comes in and is clearly better than Darnell Mooney. You can make some arguments in either direction, but like clearly better, it's debatable. How about that? Or even Alan Lazard from the Green Bay Packers. I mean, I've heard $10, $11, $12 million range. I've seen people throw numbers out there for him. Like, yes, the wide receiver market is particularly inflated, and wide receivers are becoming overpaid and getting more like quarterbacks in that regard in terms of how big of, we have to adjust our expectations a little bit and understand that the top wide receivers in this market are going to be overpaid. But I don't want to overpay for a wide receiver that I don't feel like is really going to be that much of a difference maker. I've already got in Mooney and Chase Claypool, two guys that feel like, number 2, number 3 type wide receivers with some upside to be even better than that. But right now, performing like number 2, number 3 wide receivers. How much more am I getting by adding other guys in there, more number 2, number 3 type wide receivers, especially if I'm going to have to spend $12, $13, $14, $15 million a year to do so, to just add kind of more of what I already have there. Mecole Hardman is a name that Bears fans are throwing out there now because he was tweeting at Justin Fields because they were teammates together at Oklahoma. But even a guy like Hardman, who's never really been more than a 500-600 yard receiver, could be hitting $10 million on a contract this offseason. I mean, it seems like a lot. And so for me at wide receiver, and this can be a whole separate discussion, like NFL draft or a trade seems to me like the best way to really upgrade wide receiver, or add cheaper, lower value guys that you feel like are going to outperform their contract as opposed to guys that I think might struggle to perform up to their contract. Like if DJ Chark might come cheaper because of the injuries he's had and the lack of production he's had, and he's on a $10 million deal with Detroit this year, and if I could get him even at that or even a little bit less because of how he struggled, like I would much rather pay DJ Chark $8, $9, $10 million and try and get him back to the 1,000-yard receiver he once was, as opposed to spending $12, $13, $14 million, $15 million on Jacoby Myers or Juju Smith-Schuster and trying to get them to play up to being like a 1,000-yard receiver and play up to being that big-time role. I know Juju did it once a long time ago and had 900 yards-ish with the Chiefs this year. I just don't believe him coming to Chicago and being like that big-time difference maker. Not that Chark is any guarantee to, but I'd rather take my fly. If none of the receivers are guaranteed to be big upgrades, I might as well go for the cheaper guys that feel like they still have that upgrade level upside, that they could be a big upgrade or could end up playing better than you think they are, as opposed to guys that already feel like they're kind of pushing their ceilings at this stage of where they are in their careers that are going to cost significantly more money. And that's why I don't think the Bears should invest big at wide receiver in free agency, but they should find other ways to invest big at wide receiver. I'd also throw running back in this conversation, given that Barkley and Jacobs and Tony Pollard are off the market. I'm not trying to go out there and spend $10+ million a year on another running back when you already have Khalil Herbert, and I think he's a really good runner, especially first and second down. Spend a little less money, go get a good third down back who can catch and block in the backfield. That's fine. That's going to cost you a heck of a lot less than any of those big name running backs or even David Montgomery. Like I don't really want to spend big money on David Montgomery. I'd spend little money on David Montgomery, but not big money on David Montgomery. And I don't think that's a place that the Bears should invest big time free agent dollars. The other spots really, cornerback, safety, and special teams. It wouldn't surprise me, or it wouldn't shock me if they go out and get another cornerback just to upgrade from Kindle Vildor. I mean, Jalen Johnson and Jalen Johnson and Kyler Gordon are your two top guys, but go get a better number 3 corner than Vildor. That wouldn't totally surprise me. I think Ryan Poles mentioned cornerback as a position, kind of in passing, in an answer at one of his press conferences as like a spot they may look to upgrade this offseason. Of course, you don't need to spend much at safety, just get more backups in there, and your special teams are pretty much set at this point too. So like those are not positions that the Bears are going to invest significant dollars in, and I don't think wide receiver or running back should. I think they should spend a little more than you might think at tight end and linebacker, and I think they absolutely should and will invest the most in the offensive and defensive lines. I would love to hear where you think the Bears should spend their free agent dollars. Let us know in the comments on the video here on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, or you can tweet us at Locked On Bears. You can post in the Locked On Bears Facebook group as well to keep the conversation going. Just make sure you hit that subscribe button wherever you're listening or watching the Locked On Bears podcast. That's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making the Locked On Bears podcast your first listen today. If you're looking for your second listen, you can check out Locked On NFL Draft to keep you covered on all the top prospects and all the movements on up and down draft boards, mock drafts, and so much more. Or Locked On NFL, covering all the big stories from the league-wide perspective, Lamar Jackson, Aaron Rodgers, quarterback moves, etc., etc. Plenty of great podcasts for you here on the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team every day. I hope you'll keep coming back to Locked On Bears every day for your next opportunity to bear down.